In the spring of 1930, the United States Congress passed a piece of legislation that would reshape global trade for the next decade. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act raised import duties on over 20,000 goods entering the country. At the time, it seemed like a straightforward solution to protect American farmers and manufacturers during an economic downturn. Within 2 years, it had contributed to the collapse of international commerce and deepened what became known as the Great Depression. The tariff didn't emerge from nowhere. American agriculture had been struggling since the end of the First World War. Crop prices had fallen sharply as European farms recovered and demand declined. Farmers across the Midwest faced mounting debts. Politicians heard their concerns. In 1929, President Herbert Hoover promised tariff reform to help agricultural communities. The initial proposal focused narrowly on farm products. But as the bill moved through Congress, something changed. Lawmakers from industrial states saw an opportunity. If farmers deserved protection, why not manufacturers? Amendments piled up. The textile industry wanted higher duties on imported fabrics. Steel producers sought protection from foreign competition. By the time the bill reached a final vote, it had expanded far beyond its original scope. Tariffs increased on everything from chemicals to shoes to raw materials. Economists raised alarms. More than 1,000 economists signed a petition urging President Hoover to reject the bill. They warned that raising trade barriers would invite retaliation from other countries. Historical precedent suggested that tariff wars damaged everyone involved. International trade depended on reciprocity. If America closed its markets, other nations would respond in kind. Hoover hesitated. He understood the economic arguments. But he also faced intense political pressure. The bill had bipartisan support in Congress. Farm states and industrial regions both demanded action. In June 1930, he signed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff into law. He later called it one of the most difficult decisions of his presidency. The response came quickly. Canada, America's largest trading partner, imposed retaliatory tariffs within weeks. European nations followed. France raised duties on American automobiles. Italy targeted exports of American fruit. Britain, which had maintained relatively open trade policies, began shifting toward protectionism. Spain passed the waste tariff. Switzerland implemented new trade restrictions. The global trading system, already weakened by economic instability, began to fracture. American exports collapsed. In 1929, the United States exported goods worth over $5 billion. By 1932, that figure had fallen to just over $1.5 billion. Imports dropped by a similar margin. International commerce didn't just slow. It contracted at a rate not seen in modern history. Banks that had financed trade went under. Shipping companies reduced their fleets. Ports that once bustled with activity grew quiet. The agricultural sector, which the tariff was meant to protect, suffered disproportionately. American farmers depended on export markets. When other countries closed their borders to American goods, crops sat unsold. Wheat, cotton, and tobacco prices fell even further. Foreclosures increased. Rural banks failed at alarming rates. The protection intended to help farmers had instead cut them off from their customers abroad. Manufacturing wasn't spared either. Many American industries relied on imported raw materials that now cost significantly more. Higher production costs meant higher prices. Domestic consumers already struggling with unemployment and falling incomes bought less. Companies reduced production. Workers lost jobs. The tariff created a downward spiral that fed into itself. Records indicate that the Smoot-Hawley Tariff didn't cause the Great Depression. The stock market had crashed in October 1929, months before the tariff became law. But historians broadly agree that the tariff deepened the crisis and extended its duration. It turned a severe recession into a prolonged catastrophe by destroying the mechanisms of international trade at precisely the moment they were most needed. Other countries learned from the experience. though the lesson came at enormous cost. After the Second World War, nations established new frameworks for international commerce. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, created in 1947, explicitly aimed to prevent the kind of protectionist spiral that Smoot-Hawley had triggered. Member countries agreed to reduce tariffs gradually and to resolve trade disputes through negotiation rather than retaliation. The mistake wasn't rooted in malice or ignorance. The legislators who expanded the tariff believed they were protecting their constituents. President Hoover thought he could limit the damage through diplomatic channels. Farmers and factory workers genuinely needed help during a time of economic hardship. The problem was that local solutions to a global crisis made the crisis worse. Each country acting in its own perceived interest created outcomes that harmed everyone. What appeared to be a defensive economic measure in 1930 revealed itself as something far more destructive. By the mid-1930s, as global trade remained depressed and unemployment persisted, the consequences became undeniable. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff stands as a reminder that well-intentioned policies can amplify the problems they were designed to solve, especially when they ignore how deeply interconnected modern economies had already become.